Okay, so I have 301, so I'll get started. Thank you everyone for attending presentation session 4 at the RDAP Summit 2022. This is a Zoom webinar. Attendees are muted and your cameras are turned off. To ask a question, please use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. This session will run from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Time, with the last 15 minutes for Q&A. When you put your question in the Q&A, please indicate the presenter or presenters you would like to direct your question to. We'll save all questions till the end of the session. After the session, please feel free to drop questions and continue the conversation in the chat in Whova. Any questions we did not have time to answer will be moved to Whova. The Research Data Access and Preservation Summit organizers are committed to providing an environment where all attendees can participate fully in the program and activities without fear of harassment or discriminatory behavior of any kind. There are Code of Conduct helpers available during the session, Reed and Emily, and you may direct messages to them in Whova if you need assistance. Note that you will find Code of Conduct helper after their name and in their Whova profiles. They can give you the Code of Conduct email address or the link to the incident report form if needed. So we'll start now with our first presentation entitled Actually Accessible Data, A Call to Action by Sebastian Karcher, Abigail Gobin, and Randy Pallone. And one of you can go ahead and start sharing your screen.
Thank you, Amy. So we started about thinking about actually accessible data because as these things often happen, I asked a question on a listserv, Abigail jumped on it. Later on, Randy kind of joined our team. So meet the team. This is who we are. Randy and Abigail are both at UIUC. Randy is a PhD student in disability studies, and Abigail, who you probably all know, is a data management librarian, and I work at the Qualitative Data Repository here in Syracuse. Now, one thing about accessibility is that it means a lot of things, right? Can I get to the data? Can I find the data? Can a machine find the data? Can I get to the data without paying for the data, or am I able to pay for the data? But also it means can the data be used by everyone, including disabled people? And that's accessibility as we want to talk about it today. Randy?
Sure, thank you, Sebastian. So when we're talking about accessibility in the context of this presentation, we're mainly talking about accessibility for people who can be identified as having a disability, like myself. But besides me, worldwide, there's an estimated 1 billion people who may have a disability. And in the United States, over 1 in 4 adults can be identified as having a disability. So I would argue here that we have an ethical duty to include this significant part of the population, especially since historically we have been often overlooked and underrepresented. I also want to note too that there's nothing inherently inaccessible about digital data. Many people with disabilities have the technology and skills needed to be able to access digital content, but often it's the choices we make in how data is formatted and presented that determine whether content will be accessible to disabled people. Next slide, please. Now, sorry, my cat decided to join us. Disability should be included for its own sake, but I'll also add that with ever-changing laws and policies, if content isn't accessible to the users, there's a chance that an institution can face litigation. And I'll add too that it's often easier and more cost-effective to build in accessibility from the onset rather than to retrofit and try to add it in later. So it may be in your institution's best interest to think about accessibility early on rather than waiting for a lawsuit and trying to scramble it in after the fact. I'll add too that there are a number of librarians and disability advocates calling for large institutions to only work with vendors who provide accessible material. So if you yourself are putting data out there or curating data and it is inaccessible to users, institutions may not want to work with you. Next slide, please. Now, I'll also add as well that making things accessible may have benefits outside of the target population. Kind of an easy example, making things easier to see, of course, benefits people with low vision or visual impairments, but I'm sure almost everyone would like things to be easy to see. More specific example, there's a lot of people both with disabilities, especially learning disabilities and print disabilities, and without disabilities, who find data repositories difficult to navigate. So keeping this in mind, when we're thinking about accessibility for screen reader users, people who use technology to have screens read out loud to them, who typically navigate using a keyboard rather than a mouse, for accessibility, it's easier for the screen reader user if the content, be it a website or what have you, is easy to navigate, is streamlined so that it's easy for the user to get to the content that they wish to access. So then if we're thinking about making something accessible for a screen reader, we're thinking about how to streamline it and make it easier to access. So this may benefit not just a screen reader user, but other people who may have difficulty navigating technology and make the content more usable overall. And to talk a little bit more about where we are on accessibility now, Sebastian will take over.
Right, so let's look at where we are. So this is kind of a snapshot where we are with a number of popular repository systems and web accessibility. So what you see here, relatively small, is a screenshot of the Wave tool, which is an automated accessibility checker that I recommend you all have as a browser plugin. And on the left, you see OSF and the Harvard Dataverse, so two very popular open science tools, open source. And you see a fair number of errors in OSF, tons of errors in Harvard Dataverse. This isn't great. I should note Wave isn't perfect, right? Just because you have lots of wave errors doesn't mean you're super inaccessible, and it certainly doesn't correlate directly, nor does having no wave errors mean you're perfectly accessible. But kind of speaking from some testing experience, with 60 errors in your code, you're not going to be accessible, and B, you don't get to 0 errors without consciously worrying about accessibility in your tooling. So we see here tools like OSF and Harvard Dataverse have a long way to go. Figshare is doing quite well. Dryad is doing very well. There are other repositories. ICPSR is another one I typically mention that has long worried about this quite a bit and is doing quite well. So next thing, how about our standards? Accessibility in the fifth sense that we talk about it here makes no mention in the FAIR standard. Obviously, it talks about accessible, but not accessible to everyone. It doesn't come up in the CARE guidelines. Now, they are about something else. So arguably that's justified, but it's not in there. It's not in the Core Trust Seal certification, which is arguably a problem. And it's also not in the supplement that the NIH put out as a criteria for recommended data repositories to comply with the new data management and data sharing guidelines from the NIH. How about curation? It's not in our own public curation manual. We're trying to remedy this. It's not in Lisa Johnson's book. It's not in the ARL spec kit. It's not in the ICPSR guide to social science data preparation. It's not in the majority of the data curation networks, data curation primers. So mostly it doesn't occur, accessibility doesn't appear in data curation. I did want to highlight two examples where it does. So the RDAP curation primers, Emily Oxford, who was then a graduate student at the University of Michigan, working with Rachel Woodbrook, actually spent quite some time, and we talked to her thinking about this, and wrote accessibility kind of as a consideration into the RDAP curation primers, and it'd be really cool to see that in more data curation primers. And the Cornell University's eCommons have a very thoughtful treatment of accessibility criteria for data they accept. It's a self-deposit data repository, but they have quite stringent requirements for accessibility compliance of files that are deposited in eCommons, and actually also then have some metadata to document that. And kind of along the lines of what I showed you of where we are, we want to kind of give you three starting points where you, as someone who works with data, should start working on and doing better than we currently are doing as a community. The first one is make sure that your data repository is web accessible. WCAG is the typical web standard that's used. As you curate, make sure common data formats, as you archive them, are accessible. Some formats are kind of mostly accessible by default. If you have very standard file formats like a CSV file, it tends to just be machine readable, and also machine readable by tools that various disabled users may use. But files like Microsoft Office files, Excel, Word, etc., can be made accessible, but aren't automatically. Even more so the case for PDFs that you may use for documentation, those sorts of things. Where you have audiovisual data, and we're seeing more and more about that, think about providing supplementary accessibility information for videos in a way that's easier, because they can automatically include subtitles and audio descriptions. For images, find a way to include image descriptions as much as possible in the metadata. We wanted to do this presentation at RDAP, and we're working on a paper alongside it as a call to action. We really think that the large silence about the role of accessibility or true accessibility in curation is really not just, and it's a problem for our community. So here are the things that beyond those very specific steps we want you to take home and to implement. Mainstream accessibility. This is not like something that you can do to get extra credit. It should be a core activity of data curation in both practice and in the guidance that you provide. As you choose tools or vendors, look at accessibility. Your choices matter, both in terms of the market pressure that you exert, but also in terms of the tools that you provide to all of your users. So make sure that you're looking at a tool, you're evaluating a tool, you're renewing a tool. Look at accessibility. And importantly, include disabled people as much as possible in that entire process. Hire developers with disabilities, designers with disabilities. And if you can't do those things, at a minimum, test with users with different disabilities, so that what you do isn't just kind of checking the WCAG boxes, which better than nothing, but actually meets the needs of the users that you are addressing. This is very much work in progress. We're very eager to hear from people about this, so please be in touch with any of us.
Thank you for that. I think those are all the questions we have. We had some people add some resources in the Q&A and in the chat, so we'll make sure to get those copied over. So now let me just wrap up and once again say thank you to our presenters and our audience for participating in the session. We'll have a short, about 10-minute break, and this was the last of our presentations for the day, but we'll have a social hour games night coming up after this. It will be in a new Zoom link, so you can go back to the Whova agenda for that. And thanks all so much.